We will all be deeply saddened to learn of the passing of Winnie Ewing, an inspiring and hugely influential politician, an MSP, an MP and an MEP, and of course the first person to chair the reconvened Scottish Parliament in 1999. I know members will wish to join me in conveying our deepest sympathies to our colleagues Annabel Ewing and Fergus Ewing, and to all her family and friends. And as a mark of respect, I have asked for the flags outside to be lowered for today.
Good evening. Welcome to Scotland at 7. My name's Saoirse Healey. As you just saw from the VT, SNP icon and former MP Winnie Ewing has died at the age of 93. Winnie Ewing was first elected to the House of Commons in 1967 and served as President of the Scottish National Party from 1987 to 2005. She was the party's first female MP and is widely credited with propelling the party into mainstream politics, famously declaring, "Stop the world, Scotland wants to get on," after her victory in the 1967 Hamilton by-election. She served in 3 parliaments over the course of her career, including the European Parliament and famously reconvening the Scottish Parliament in Edinburgh in 1999. In tribute to Winnie Ewing today, First Minister Humza Yousaf said, "I am heartbroken at this loss. My condolences go to Winnie's family, particularly her 3 children, Fergus, Annabel and Terry." Adding, "Winnie was a pioneer and a patriot, and there were so many aspects of her life and work that hope will get the recognition they deserve in the days to come. From the bottom of my heart, I say thank you, Madam Ecos, for your service to our party and our movement and country." A statement issued on behalf of her family said, "Miss Ewing, generally considered the most important Scottish politician of her generation, served as an MP, MEP and MSP, and was the first presiding officer of the reconvened Scottish Parliament in 1999. She sparked the revival of the SNP's fortunes, which continue to this day, with her victory in the Hamilton by-election of 1967. Miss Ewing died on Wednesday, aged 93, surrounded by her family. She is survived by her children, Fergus, Annabel and Terry, and grandchildren, Natasha, Ciara, Jamie and Sophie. She also had a deep affection for daughters-in-law, Fiona and Jackie. She was a loving and devoted wife to Stuart Martin Ewing, who died in 2003, aged 76. It would be appreciated if the family could be accorded privacy at this time. Next, as always, we begin with the Ukraine update. It's day 484. Volodymyr Zelensky has conceded that Ukraine's counteroffensive may be going slower than desired, but insisted he will not needlessly risk soldiers' lives to meet international expectations. The EU pledged a further €50 billion in loans and grants, while the UK and US promised $3 billion and $1 billion respectively in financial support at a London conference focusing on the reconstruction of Ukraine. The World Bank, in conjunction with the government of Ukraine, the European Commission and the UN, has put the cost of reconstruction and recovery at $411 billion after a year of war. On the sidelines of the conference, James Cleverly, the UK Foreign Secretary, has said that all NATO allies were backing a plan to give Ukraine a fast-track membership to NATO, similar to the kind Sweden and Finland were offered earlier this year. The Ukrainian President's Chief of Staff, Andriy Yermak, has said that Ukraine expects to be invited to join NATO with an open date at the Military Alliances Summit in Vilnius next month. He added that the failure of the alliance to deliver a strong decision at the 11-12 July summit would demoralize Ukrainians, and that Ukraine had demonstrated it was ready to join NATO with its fighting on the battlefield. The chief of the mercenary group Wagner has accused Russian Defense Ministry of deceiving Russians about the course of Ukraine's offensive, pointing to Kyiv's progress on the battlefield. Kyiv's mayor, Vitaly Klitschko, has accused opponents of waging a campaign to discredit him and force him out of office after a rift with Zelensky. The former boxing champion has been criticised after a public outcry over the deaths of 3 people were locked out of an air raid shelter during a Russian attack on Kyiv this month. Russia's constitutional court has rejected an attempt by human rights groups to seek the repeal of the law that bans people from speaking out against Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Campaigners, including legal defense OVD Group Info, has banned human rights organization Memorial had filed the case in April, saying it violated articles of Russia's constitution, including free speech and freedom of conscience. EU governments agreed to an 11th package of sanctions against Russia aimed at stopping other countries and companies from circumventing existing measures. The new package forbids transit via Russia of an expanded list of goods and technology which might aid Russia's military or security sector. Putin announced that new Sarmat nuclear-capable intercontinental ballistic missiles would soon enter service. The missiles are designed to carry out nuclear strikes on targets thousands of miles away and can be launched from land, sea or air, but their deployment has proceeded slower than planned. Russia's top investigator Alexander Bastrygin told state-owned TASS News that more than 30 Ukrainians had been given long jail terms in Russian-held Ukraine for crimes against peace and human security, including the killing of civilians. The Russian Defense Ministry claims air defenses downed 3 drones in Moscow yesterday in what it called an attempted terrorist attack by Ukraine. Officials said the drones had targeted a military base near Russia's capital. The Bank of England has increased interest rates by 0.5 point to reach 5% in its continuing efforts to tackle inflation, adding to the pressure on those already struggling with higher mortgage costs. This move comes following the release of yesterday's inflation figures, which showed inflation remained unchanged at 8.7% in May, driving expectations that the central bank would have no choice but to respond. Inflation was expected to fall to 8.4%, which would still have been well above the bank's 2% target. The bank's Monetary Policy Committee, the MPC, increased rates for the 13th consecutive time to the highest level since 2008, stating that there has been significant upside news in recent data that indicates more persistence in the inflation process against the backdrop of a tight labour market and continued resilience in demand. The bank reported that it would further increase interest rates if necessary and that it was still watching out for persistent inflationary risks. 7 members of the bank's rate-setting panel, including the governor Andrew Bailey, voted in favour of the half-point rise, outnumbering 2 members, the independent economist Swati Dhingra and Silvana Tinero, who pushed for interest rates to be held steady due to concerns over the economic impact of the previous 12 increases. The bank's decision has seen many high street lenders and building societies push up the cost of a usual 2-year fixed-rate mortgage to over 6%, the highest rate since Liz Truss's mini-budget was announced last year. Borrowing costs have also steadily risen from the record low of only 0.1% in December of 2021 since the bank began raising the interest rates. Over a quarter of mortgage holders are expected to come to the end of cheap deals made before this time, leaving many people waiting nervously to be hit by higher borrowing costs. Chancellor Hunt stated that the government's resolve to bring down inflation was watertight because it is the only way to relieve pressures on families with mortgages. If we don't act now, it will be worse later. While SNP social justice spokesman David Lind commented that families should not have to foot the bill for Westminster's failures, and that the UK government had shafted mortgage holders and first-time buyers. The SNP has said that Brexit is still impacting the cost of living and polling has shown that people believe Brexit is going poorly. This is ahead of the anniversary of Brexit tomorrow. SNP Westminster Deputy Leader Mary Black has stated that there is no doubt that the Tories and pro-Brexit Labour Party have made people in Scotland poorer by imposing Brexit against our will, as the cost of living soars and the UK economy falls further behind. Commenting further, Mary Black said that the UK was on a path to long-term decline and that Brexit is fueling the cost of living crisis, hammering the UK. This statement comes as the UK suffers an unchanged rate of inflation of 8.7%, remaining higher and more stubborn than the US and many countries in the EU. Alongside this, there has been an increase in interest rates from the Bank of England, and the Bank of England Governor, Mark Carney, has been warning that Brexit is leading to a weaker pound, higher inflation and weaker growth. The OBR also forecasts a 4% hit to GDP and a 15% hit to trade intensity due to Brexit. Whilst the London School of Economics had published research showing that Brexit has increased UK food bills by £7 billion, and analysis from Bloomberg Economics shows that Brexit may be costing the UK up to £100 billion a year in lost output. Amidst these difficulties, polling for think tank UK in a Changing Europe shows that only 18% of 2016 Leave voters believe that Brexit has been a success, while pollsters Public First reported that 4,000 Leave voters they have surveyed, less than a fifth, 18%, of them said that Brexit had gone well or very well, while 30% said it had gone neither well nor badly, and 26% said it's still too soon to say. The UK in a Changing Europe director, Adnan Menon, said disappointment about the way Brexit had been managed is likely to exacerbate mistrust of politicians, stating that while very few people think Brexit is going well, a large number of Leavers also believe it is still too soon to make a definitive judgment. Many Leave voters believe Brexit has not been a success because politicians have let them down. The danger is that this will lead to an erosion of faith in politics and politicians. Hundreds of long-term sick and mentally ill people from the Windrush generation were sent to the Caribbean from UK hospitals, according to an investigation conducted by the BBC. Sometimes this was done without giving informed consent. This analysis of formerly classified National Archive documents found that 400 people were sent back to their countries of birth between the 1950s and the 1970s under a scheme that was supposedly voluntary, but that may have not involved a proper consent process. Children of those who were repatriated said that their families were torn apart and some were never reunited with their relatives. They have called for an inquiry in response to these revelations. Most of the people impacted were repatriated by the National Assistance Board, the forerunners for the Department of Work and Pensions, which was responsible for the UK's welfare system at the time. The board agreed with the Colonial Office in 1949 to pay for the repatriation of individuals who, through ill health or inability to adapt themselves to conditions in this country, were unable to support themselves. Under the scheme, patients were supposed to have expressed a wish to return, and repatriation should only have been carried out if it would benefit them and if there were suitable arrangements in their country of origin. However, the investigation uncovered documents suggesting that the decision to repatriate was sometimes motivated by a desire to reduce pressure on hospital beds. A letter from the Office of the High Commissioner of Jamaica in 1963 to the Commonwealth Relations Office said it received a number of requests from hospital authorities for the repatriation of chronically ill patients, largely on the grounds of pressure on beds or other hospital services. The letter noted that the requests gave the impression that the institutions concerned regard mental disorder and in some cases chronic illness as grounds for repatriation of Commonwealth citizens regardless of whether adequate treatment and care are available. A UK government spokesperson said the law had been changed since the time of these cases. Now, an independent tribunal has to be agreed that any repatriation would be in the best interests of the patient. We recognise the campaigning of families seeking to address the historic injustice faced by their loved ones and remain absolutely committed to righting the wrongs faced by those in the Windrush generation. Joseph Armantrading was one of the people sent back. He arrived in the UK from the British colony of St Kitts, travelling on a British passport in 1954, and lived in Nottingham with his wife and 5 daughters. He was diagnosed with paranoid psychosis in the 1960s, and in 1966, after 12 years of living in the UK, he was returned to St Kitts. He never saw his family again. His daughter June, who's now 65, said, "It's really upsetting. This was a vulnerable man. You're supposed to be looking after vulnerable people," and they didn't. There's anger in Japan as report reveals that 16,500 people were sterilized without their consent under the eugenics law. The publishing of a government report in Japan revealing that children as young as 9 were among thousands who were forcibly sterilized under a eugenics law that was not repealed until the 1990s, and it sparked anger amongst campaigners. The 1,400-page report submitted to Parliament this week details how between 1948 and 1996, about 16,500 people were operated on without their consent under the law, which aimed to prevent the birth of poor-quality descendants and protect the life and health of the mother. The majority of the victims of this policy were women. A further 8,000 other people gave their consent, most likely under pressure, whilst almost 60,000 women had abortions because of hereditary illnesses. The 2 9-year-olds who were sterilized were a boy and a girl, according to the report. The victims' long campaign for the redress has emphasized the Japanese state's mistreatment of those with disabilities and chronic conditions in the period following World War II. Victims of the sterilization program have campaigned for decades, seeking financial damages and recognition of the physical and mental anguish they endured. MPs passed legislation offering each victim a government compensation of $3.2 million, which is $22,800, which passed in 2019. This amount, campaigners have said, does not reflect the suffering of the victims that it had experienced. The application deadline for the payment is due to expire in April 2024, but to date only 1,049 have received the sum, according to media reports. So far, 4 courts have awarded damages to victims, but others have sided with the government, saying that 20 years statute of limitation has passed. Lawyers have argued that the victims learned of the nature of their surgery too late to meet the legal deadline to seek redress. Earlier this month, a high court rejected demands for damages for 2 women, including Junko Lizuka, who was 16 when she was taken to a clinic in northeastern Japan and forced to have a mysterious operation which, she would later discover, would prevent her from ever having children. After the publication of the report, the Chief Cabinet Secretary, Hirokazu Matsuno, said the government sincerely reflects on and deeply apologizes for the tremendous pain victims suffered through forced sterilization. The report noted that sterilization under the eugenics law, which allowed authorities to carry out the procedure on people with intellectual disabilities, mental illness, or hereditary disorders to prevent the birth of inferior children, was a requirement for admission to some welfare facilities or for marriage. Koji Nisato, a lawyer representing the victims, praised the report for revealing the full horror of forced sterilization, but said it left important questions unanswered. According to the Kyodo news agency, Nisato said that the report did not reveal why the law was created, or why it took 48 years to amend, or why the victims were never compensated. Junko Lizuka, who will appeal against the ruling in the compensation case, said she was suffering from the trauma for more than 6 decades after she was sterilized without her consent. I and other victims are getting old, and some have died, she said. I'm sick and often have to go to hospital, but we must not allow the harm that was inflicted on us to remain hidden in the darkness. Moving to Russia now, a Moscow court has rejected the Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovitz's appeal to be released, ruling that he must remain in pre-trial detention on espionage charges until at least late August. Gershkovitz has been in detention for almost 3 months in the Lefortovo prison in Moscow, a prison reserved for targets of FSB investigations. US Ambassador Lynn Tracy and other officials attended an appeal hearing this morning in the Moscow City Court. Gershkovitz's parents, Ella and Mikhail, traveled to Russia from the US for the hearing. Tracy said she was extremely disappointed by the ruling, adding that Gershkovitz was an innocent journalist and Russia's charges against him were baseless. Such hostage diplomacy is unacceptable and we call on the Russian Federation to release him, she said. Gershkovitz, 31, was accredited to work in the country by Russia's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but was detained in late March on espionage charges whilst on a reporting trip in the city of Ekaterinburg. The espionage charges against him are widely viewed as spurious and are seen as an effort to pressure Washington into releasing Russian prisoners, including spies and financial criminals with ties to powerful figures in Russia. As such, American officials have pointed out that the US does not hold any prisoners who might be considered an equal trade for Gershkovitz. The reporter faces a lengthy pre-trial detention process while investigators gather their case, which all remains secret. Espionage cases can take over a year to come to trial, and the Kremlin usually says it cannot interfere in an investigation and must wait until a verdict is issued to begin negotiations. The US has declared Gershkovitz to be wrongfully detained and called for his release. Sticking with America now, according to a report published today, the American right wing's ongoing fight against the so-called woke capitalism is partially driven by fossil fuel interests or industry allies. The term woke, an adjective derived from African American Vernacular English, AAVE, meaning aware and alert to racial prejudice and discrimination, is used by American conservatives in the term woke capitalism to refer to the environmental, social, and corporate governance, the ESG, criteria that is used to screen investments based on their environmental and social impact. According to a new report from the strategic research and advisory firm Pleiades Strategy, Republican lawmakers in 37 states introduced 165 pieces of anti-ESG legislation this year. The 165 proposals aim to employ a variety of tactics ranging from imposing limits on public contracts and restricting pension managers to forcing disclosures and combating federal investment rules. When researchers examined the news articles, fiscal notes, and State House testimony relating to each bill, they found that the majority of them bore a strong resemblance to model bills crafted or circulated by 4 influential right-wing think tanks. These think tanks are the American Legislative Exchange Council, the Heritage Foundation, the Heartland Institute, and the Foundation for Government Accountability. All of these are affiliated with the far-right think tank Coalition State Policy Network, whose members have also fought to pass punitive anti-pipeline protest laws and which has received funding from groups linked to fossil fuel billionaires Charles Koch and the late David Koch. According to researchers, the American Petroleum Institute, the nation's largest oil and gas lobbying organization, has also worked to shape anti-ESG policies. And representatives from several other fossil fuel interest groups have supported these efforts as well. Despite all of this, only 22 of the 165 proposed anti-ESG bills progressed through the state houses, and many that did pass were altered or watered down before they became law, the report states. However, those who oppose the legislation fear negative consequences for taxpayers and a serious negative impact on future climate policy. Francis Sawyers, founder of the Pleiades strategy and co-author of the report, said that the laws could make it harder for states to take advantage of the clean energy investments offered by the Inflation Reduction Act, due to fears that those funds would drive competition with the industries favours the bill. Overall, the legislation has proven unpopular, but the authors of the report still expect to see more of it in the coming years as policymakers take the energy transition more seriously. Back to Scotland now, and the Rural Affairs Secretary is set to address farmers at the Royal Highland Show and announce future agricultural support. New conditions for farming support payments will be introduced from 2025 with the aim to help more of Scotland's farmers and crofters cut emissions and tackle climate change. The criteria will also look to support farmers and crofters to meet more of our food needs sustainably and farm and croft while working to protect nature. From 2025, farmers and crofters will be required to adopt the following practices to qualify for the payment. Foundations of a whole farm plan, which will include soil testing, animal health and welfare declaration, carbon audits, biodiversity audits, and supported business planning. Protections for peatlands and wetlands to help farmers restore these vital habitats to sequester more carbon, and meet new conditions to the Scottish Suckler Beef Support Scheme to help cut emissions intensity and to make beef production more efficient. Speaking ahead of her address to the farmers and crofters at the Quality Meat Scotland breakfast event at the Royal Highland Show, Rural Affairs Secretary Mary Gorgon said, "As we take urgent action to tackle the climate emergency, I am determined to ensure that high-quality food production is maintained. Unlike in England, there will be no cliff edges in support. I am committed to maintaining direct payments and supporting our nation's producers through a just transition." The Hayward Review has been published. Professor Louise Hayward's report following her independent review of the qualifications and assessments, the IRQA, has been published today. The report recommends the reform of the current senior school phase, including the creation of a new Scottish Diploma of Achievement. Alongside the recent Withers Review of Skills Systems and National Discussion on Education, the report sets out a case for significant change across the sector. The Scottish Government now intends to consider the recommendations made in the new report and respond in due course. Key recommendations of the Hayward Report include the adoption of an SDA, the Scottish Diploma of Achievement, as a graduation certificate for all senior phase educational settings, the end of exams in S4 and a wider range of assessment methods used in hires and advanced hires, and a digital portfolio for all learners which allows them to record personal achievements, identify and plan future learning. Education Secretary Jenny Gilruth has said that these recommendations for reform could amount to a radical shift in Scottish education. As Cabinet Secretary, I need to be certain that these changes are the right ones for Scotland's young people, and I am determined that the voices of teachers will be central to this process. The Scottish Government's detailed response of the IRQA will be considered alongside wider reform activity being taken forward following the national discussion, the review of skills delivery landscape, the forthcoming purpose and principles for post-school education, research and skills, and establishment of a new national education bodies. New fireworks laws have come into force as local authorities have new powers today to help reduce the negative impacts of fireworks. Councils can now designate firework control zones that make it a criminal offence to ignite a firework or knowingly throw a lit firework in a zone which can include private properties or gardens. The maximum penalties are a fine of £5,000 or up to 6 months in prison. Organised public firework displays will still be permitted within zones to allow people to enjoy fireworks safely. The provisions are one of the key measures from the Fireworks and Pyrotechnics Articles Scotland Act 2022. Firework control zones are a part of a group of measures being introduced by the Scottish Government aimed at encouraging the safe and appropriate use of fireworks. Earlier this month, new offences came into force to tackle the risk of public safety caused by the misuse of pyrotechnics. It is now illegal for members of the public to possess pyrotechnics in a public place, as well as at any sporting or live music events with more than 1,000 people attending without a reasonable excuse. Minister for Victims and Community Safety, Siobhan Brown, has said that evidence and engagement with communities shows strong public support for tougher action on fireworks, which, along with other pyrotechnic articles, can cause harm, serious injury, and distress to people, pets, and the wider community. Adding that giving local authorities additional powers to create firework control zones with input from the local community marks a significant step in tackling the issues caused by fireworks, which are dangerous when used inappropriately. So that's it. That was our final story of the night. Before I go, I just wanted to remind you that here at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend so heavily on the generosity of you, our supporters, our viewers. So to everyone who's donated so far and to everyone who's signed up to make regular monthly payments, thank you so much. Our programmes will, of course, always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. We've set ourselves a target of adding 10,000 new subscribers to enable us to employ staff and make even more programmes for you at home to enjoy. I've been Saoirse Healey. Good night and thank you for watching.